Everywhere we turn, we see division. Everywhere we go, we feel alone. How do we live in a time that is so polarizing and isolating? How do we find meaning in a world filled with so much noise? Where is the understanding and empathy? Where is the freedom from our pain? Join me, Russell Eugene Welch III. This is our journey together as we discover that the answers to life's biggest questions and hardest choices are not some deep, mystical secret locked away in some far-off corner of the universe, but the soft, gentle voice in our own hearts. This is our first step, as together we embark on our incredible adventure of empathy, unity, and understanding. These are the stories of human triumph. Your stories, our stories. This is the struggle for meaning. Today on the show, we have another special guest. He is a thoughtful, interesting chap who I've had some excellent conversations with. It's a reoccurring pattern of mine. We actually met on Facebook due to some activism of his. We've exchanged a lot of thoughts and interesting ideas. Without further ado, I give you today's guest, Alan. Alan, welcome to the Struggle for Meaning podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little about yourself.
First-time home buyer, moved out of Illinois 3 years ago, where I was born and raised in Chicago, suburbs. Moved out to Georgia, it's a little bit slower pace, which is nice. I currently work for a technology company that does corporate AV staging. If you're familiar with the Olympics or anything like car shows, that's pretty much what we do.
Now, how would you describe yourself, not in terms of like job or occupation, but in terms of who you identify as a person? What makes you you and no one else?
It's kind of a hard one. I like to think that I don't like to give up on things very easily. I try to see everything I can through the best way I can. If we're going to go deeper, I believe I'm an agnostic. After looking at different religions and theories and other things that we see all around us, I believe there's something bigger than us. But I don't necessarily think he plays a role in our everyday lives, but I think there's something looking out for us in some ways.
What would you describe your personal philosophy as?
Personal philosophy is similar to what you can find in the Bible or various Buddhist philosophies and stuff. Is just be good to those around you and treat others like you'd like to be treated. I think a level of that comes from self-respect and understanding yourself and understanding how you would like to be treated and doing the same for others. If you're struggling with something, maybe you're hoping somebody will just give you a hug or reach out and say, "Is everything okay?" And I like to try to be that person and be that guy that somebody can just come to and help them through something.
So it seems like your philosophy is fairly people-focused.
I'd like to believe so. And people is a very broad category, and that's the way I like it. I was never a big fan of when social media first came out and started putting labels on stuff. I understand people's desire to want their individuality, but in the same sense, we are all human and we all have similar struggles, if you will, and which is, I believe, the exact reason for your podcast is we are all one in that sense, and each of us have our varying tendencies of environment or nurturing, but every once in a while we all need some sort of help or support.
As a man, you're not uncomfortable asking for help?
No, I do like to try to figure out stuff for myself first. I I've had many discussions with my parents about this, and they sat me down one day and said, "Do you still love us?" And I thought that was a very obscure question, but I understood. And from a very early age, they had me learn how to do my laundry, how to cook, how to clean, and all that kind of good stuff. And from that point, I felt very independent, and I thought that was the best thing you could do for a child. So I was like, yes, I still love you. Of course I love you, and I will always need you in some sense. But in the same way, feeling independent and stuff as you would want for your child is the greatest step in, taking control of yourself. But if you need help, yes, definitely, you got to reach out and ask for it.
So do you think other men should feel uncomfortable asking for help? What would you say to other men who are struggling?
Absolutely not. Unfortunately, with all the, I don't want to get to it too soon, but the trigger word thing, the idea of patriotism and manliness feel like they have to go hand in hand, that you have to carry everything on your shoulders and you have to do it all yourself. But no, we never really talked about feelings and other stuff, and we were always told, you got to be a man and hold it all in. But no, you can't just go through life by yourself. I know that's the animalistic tendency of your lizard brain and whatever else you want to call it, but we've evolved as a society based on social norms, in a sense. And that one of those things is being able to get help every once in a while if you need it.
So obviously you seem to have a very comfortable, healthy relationship with your own masculinity because, well, you're willing to put in the work and roll up your sleeves and try. Yeah. You're also not uncomfortable asking for help. What started you down that road? What was your catalyst moment that began your journey in that direction to reach that mindset?
There's probably one major one that I could think of, and that's kind of the conversation we had in our last call, talking about deciding college. You're talking about a 16-year-old, or if you're even talking about those people that want to be Ivy Leaguers or whatever, that decide this in kindergarten almost, that they want to do this for the rest of their lives. And I came to a head one time, and just it felt like everything was going wonky. So I reached a breaking point, and I finally kind of screamed at my dad one day and went, I don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life. And it really hit, because again, we talked about this idea that, okay, I spent 1/5 of my life deciding what I want to do for the rest of the 4/5 of my life. And it's kind of a specific thing now. It's not back in the day when you had, okay, it's just science or it's just music or whatever. Like, we have these subgenres of everything, and it was very overwhelming. And at that point, I realized I had to ask people around me, like, hey, what am I good at? Like, what am I doing here? What is even a possibility of what can I do? And my first major, didn't really pan out. I wanted to be a rocket scientist. I know it sounds very funny, but the idea of propulsion and all that kind of stirred me. And that's when I came to my second realization that I need help, is that I wasn't really cut out for that kind of school, I guess you could say. And then studied here and there for a little while, and then got my third epiphany. It's more of an internal one, when my friends called me up and said, hey, we're going to Illinois State and we need a fourth roommate. I'm like, okay, sure, why not? And they're like, hey, theater. They got a theater program. I'm like, wait, you can major in that? So that was kind of my epiphany for like schooling and figuring out what I want to do and things I'm passionate about. And it did take a little inner searching, but in the same sense, it took asking around a little bit, like, hey, what else can I do with my life? And then finding out that there's actually something that I like to do for myself. So that was kind of nice.
So you made an effort to go to the people around you who you trusted to get an outside perspective on where you should go.
Yep.
What did you do with this information when you got it? Did this kind of define you? Did you just filter this information? Like, how much of an effect did this have on your direction?
Well, in the first sense, like, picking a major, it just kind of filtered through it. Like, I enjoyed doing what I was doing. Like, I used to do pyrotechnics and stuff, and I enjoyed it, but it didn't feel like it was necessarily a career type deal for me, unless it was something, military or whatever. And I was a little scared of the military at the time, because I scored really high on a placement test, and the recruiter looked shocked, and that kind of scared me. And I'm like, is that kind of a common thing? And he gave me a 2-week notice, like, hey, you got to decide whether you're going to join or not. And I was not really into that quick decision making for the next 4 years of my life. So I told my parents, military or Florida. which is where my first school was.
Did that pressure of the 2 weeks to make that decision, that big life decision, did that dig up a lot of your past experience of the pressure to, as you said before, make a decision in the first stage of your life for how the rest of it would be affected?
Yeah, because again, it's that split moment decision, choosing a college, going to join the military, choosing a trade, anything like that. And that snap decision will sort of define the next part of your life, if not all of it. Because, if you join the military, there's only, a few routes that you really see. You see the 4-year guy that gets out right away and goes to school and becomes productive. Or there's the one that, becomes the career guy. And there's nothing wrong with either of those, but that's not what I wanted. So I tried to steer away from that and try to get a degree more so in the propulsion and the explosion part of the military, and I wanted to do weapons defense contracting, but that didn't pan out, and probably for the better.
So would it be fair to say you felt a pretty strong pressure in your youth to make a decision?
Yes.
Where do you think that pressure came from? Where did it seem like that pressure was coming from?
I don't want to blame them necessarily, but the idea of parents and society all saying you have to go to college, that you have to get a degree in something, and that piece of paper is what defines the rest of you. I knew that trade schools were a thing back then. I knew plenty of people that were pipe fitters or welders or anything like that, and it seemed appealing, but that's not what my parents wanted for me. But at the same time, once I found out there was a degree that was for me that allowed me to do a lot of that stuff and made me happy, I was kind of happy to go get that degree at least.
Now, do you think that pressure to make a decision made it more difficult to find what you were passionate about, or do you think it drove you to
it? Because it was a little bit of both. While I took I didn't take 2 years off, but I went to a community college for a couple of years, and I went through 2 or 3 other majors, and there were things I liked to do, but I didn't necessarily want to deconstruct everything that I loved about it. So one of my majors was music, and we started with music theory, and it kept destroying stuff that I was listening to, like deconstructing it, and I didn't want that in my professional life. It's music, something I enjoy, so I wanted to keep enjoying that. So I went into welding. Welding was fun, but it wasn't quite something I want to do day in and day out. And then, like I said, I came across theater, and theater has so many different departments, and you can kind of thrive in the arts, if you will, the physical arts.
So you've mentioned music, and you've mentioned theater, and you've mentioned arts. Do you think that you were drawn to those things because you had more of like an artistic nature and a drive for self-expression? Or do you think you used those things to develop those traits?
That's an interesting question. Growing up, Legos was a big influence, and my mom was also a piano teacher. So the idea of art and engineering was always something that kind of clicked with me. So like with the fireworks, it was the propulsion and the chemicals that make a display in the sky. The Legos themselves, these just regular bricks that when you put them together, it can make these interesting creations. And then I was in theater in grade school and stuff, so once I saw that you could do these physical things, something as simple as a trap door or Pepper's Ghost were like really big inspirations to me, being like, okay, we have a concept and we want to see how we can do it in real life. Of course, now we have CGI and all that stuff, but when it comes to physical practicalities, some of the things that people design are works of art and engineering all in one. For instance, like Mad Max, a lot of those cars were built, and they're pretty cool.
So would the relationship to you between art and engineering be based on the fact that it's both a creation of something new and an expression of something?
Yes, that would be a good way to put it. The best way I can define art is the way I defined it in an art class. I wasn't paying attention. Teacher called on me and told me to tell him what art was. And the best thing that could come up at the top of my head was art is anything that evokes emotion. And for me, that strong emotion comes from somebody, architectural engineering, mechanical engineering, and any sort of that engineering where you can take a physical substance and create something beautiful with it became a really big thing for me to follow. So, cars, buildings, any sort of really intricate construction or woodworking, metalwork, any of that stuff was very interesting.
So you seem to be driven by a desire to create things.
Yes.
Where do you get that desire from, or what drives you to create things? Why creation? What does it mean to you? What do you feel when you create something?
Creation is kind of, I guess important for everything, because you can talk about entrepreneurs. They're the ones that create these ideas, that create big businesses or whatever that help society or help people. But usually the idea of creation is to help somebody figure a new efficient way of doing it, or a way of helping somebody else. So the idea of creation being a way of helping people is a very big aspect of it. From where I learned it from was probably both my parents. My dad was a little bit more of the engineering type, and my mom was, obviously, since she's a piano teacher, a little bit more of the artsy side. So when we put those things together, and as I learned later in life too, my mom's a photographer, and my dad used to develop the film. He was kind of a chemist in the sense, or he was the chemist, and she was the one that framed it, and together they just made a really cool collaboration, if you will, of art and science, and you get a cool product, and you get something new out of it, and that was always something that was amazing to watch.
At the beginning of this, you had laid out a philosophy that revolves around helping people, and then you talked about how art and engineering are a form of creation and expression that allows you to help people. What do you think drives you for this desire to help people through creating things?
So a lot of it is the sense that I like to see the looks on other people's faces. So with the company that I work with, like I said, we do large displays and stuff, and I personally do like projection. I help with LED. Our company also deals with audio and lighting. So when we put on these grand displays of what technology is able to do, VR, AR, projection mapping, all that kind of stuff, and you see the look on people's faces, children's faces, anybody who looks at these displays that we do, and you see that sense of like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. Yeah, sometimes it's about the content, like, oh, that car is cool, but the way that we do it, it really gives me inspiration for children to learn with technology and see that's more than just circuits and wires and stuff, and it's really cool to watch their expressions, and that gives me a really warm heart, seeing like, oh my goodness, this is how it's possible. We're so thankful there's people behind this that create not just the physical content, but also the hardware that makes all of this together very beautiful.
So you're trying to share a sense of wonder.
Yes, just like when I was a kid, like I said, something as simple as a trapdoor, a turntable. If you're familiar with Pepper's Ghost, the idea of creating a hologram, using mist or fog as a projection screen, and all that type of physicality, bringing wonder to, like, how do they do that? That's amazing. I love that. And that's what I like to spread with people.
Do you think sharing a sense of wonder with other people makes you feel like more connected to them and like you belong?
Yes, in a sense. For instance, when I took a lighting class, every week we were given a word, and we had to bring in 4 pictures that helped describe that word to us. And it wasn't a noun; it was more like an adverb or an adjective, and we had to try to visualize what it was. We did something similar in a sound class too. The idea is you take these mental images and try to show them to people, and that's kind of what we do in theater and a few other places in our industry. Is we have these visual concepts that we want to display to other people. So whether it comes down to something as simple as a commercial, an advertisement campaign, or anything like that, the idea is we want to show somebody something. And with my company, or the company I work for, I should say, we're able to show people these products. They're not necessarily my products, but they're somebody else's ideas, and you get the sense of amazement that we help design the hardware to show their ideas to these people. And that's wonderful, because It's hard to describe. The one of the best ways I can say is like I didn't personally work on the project, but we did an autonomous truck launch, and the idea was we used the Hoover Dam as a projection screen. They drove this autonomous truck down, and it was this grand display of technology, and this was a world record for largest projector screen, and all sorts of crazy things. And it was just the sense that this is what our company is capable of, and this is what we are capable of, and we can do anything with this technology to spread good messages and the sense of wonderment that I had as a kid.
So it made you feel empowered.
Empowered, yes. Yeah, you could say that.
Now, what would you say was your first or most defining moment in discovering or having a sense of wonder for you personally?
I'm not exactly sure, honestly. I always looked to be the guy behind the sense of wonderment. I mean, right now I'm in front of the camera, in front of the mic, which is a weird place for me personally. But the wonderment always came about with the sense of imagination. I have an idea, I want to express it to somebody else, I need to figure out how to do that. And that's kind of where it came from, the idea of especially now we have all this technology, and we have so many things we want to say and we want to convey. And now some people are starting to find an outlet for that type of stuff. So back in the day you had photography, even further back you had painting, further back you had cave drawings, and acting in general, like charades or anything like that. And now we have TikTok, and we have digital cameras, we have projectors, and people have come up with these wonderful ways of expressing themselves and their messages. And again, not just in my industry with marketing or statistics or anything like that, but just digital artwork that wouldn't be physically possible without, say, a computer.
You think that creating better technology and sharing it with people brings us closer together?
I wouldn't necessarily say better technology, but I'd say different technology. Just because something is better doesn't mean that it necessarily conveys your message better. This is going to be a little off tangent, but the idea that everything that we're doing digitally now is chasing something we already had analog. The idea of MP3s, we're going back to vinyl. Photography is trying to chase a resolution that was similar to film. Same with the cinema. They're trying to get chips that are similar to what they had as 70 millimeter film. So it's not that it's necessarily newer or better, it's just that it's a different mode, and some people thrive in different aspects of those things. So like there's different cameras out there, there's different microphones, and it's all a sense of how I want to convey my message and how I want you to perceive it.
It's all a sense of how I want to convey my message and how I want you to perceive it.
It's the creativity and diversity of self-expression.
Yes, yeah. So like for instance, in your studio, you might like a certain mic.
Yeah, I have a favorite mic for sure. This one, I'd say what it is, but they're not sponsoring me, so I'm not giving them the promotion.
Yes, very much so. And
so, what was a moment that you shared something with someone? You shared a sense of wonder. You shared art with someone that really stood out to you and made you realize that this is what you wanted to do?
Can't think of any particular moments that like stick out, but anything that has to do with my family really, because we'd like to. My parents would take me places, movies. My mom would every once in a while sneak me along with my brother's field trips to musicals and something like Fantasia, which was a movie but still music based. And then even the one thing that first came to mind was my wedding with my wife. I know it's not necessarily the most artsy thing, but the idea was that we planned it. We did all the flowers, I did the lighting, we did the sound, we did everything ourselves, except for the food. But that was honestly the first thing that came to mind, is sharing this this gift that I think that I have with my wife and my family. And I mean, we got such great comments and stuff. And it really made me feel good, and I'm sure she loved the wedding too. And that was the big one that came to mind, was marrying my wife.
So do you think that's where your sense of community comes from, is by sharing things like this?
I definitely do. I think asking for help and sharing experiences are like two of the biggest things we can do for people. And if it weren't for somebody else teaching us along the way, I don't think we'd be anywhere near as far as we are now. Similar idea with animals or whatever. They teach survival traits, so at least they have a chance. If we grew up on our own, who knows where we'd be right now? We'd probably be all like feral cats, and just even they stick together, which is an interesting thing. But yes, I believe communication and sharing ideas and sharing experiences and all that are very vital, to our existence and our continued existence.
But you're right. Pretty much the most powerful tool that we as humans have, right up there at the top, is the fact that, as you said, we can communicate information and pass on information, especially by being able to write it down, or now to digitalize it, store it, archive it in many different ways, and communicate it in many different ways. Because other animals, even if they live a very long lifespan, they have to be taught directly from someone else. Information can't be passed down from generation to generation except for firsthand. But now we can go back and we can see and hear and read and have all this collection of information and data from generation after generation that compounds and that empowers us to make progress like other species can't.
Yeah. And unfortunately, as bright as we are, we don't always take into account all of what's been written down. And as I say, those that don't learn history are doomed to repeat it. And it's kind of where we're at right now. And it's kind of sad. We have all this stuff available to us, and we choose what we want our children to learn. We choose what not to tell them. And it's going to come to stuff like this. Yeah, if we don't share and communicate all of the knowledge base, if we pick and choose what we want to share, it's going to create a very biased story, and that's kind of where we're at right now. And bias isn't always a bad thing, but when it comes to actual true knowledge, like something or something actually happened on this date, this is what happened. That's a fact. That's not an opinion. That something like JFK being assassinated, that was a fact. He was killed. And if we didn't learn about something like that, who knows what the repercussions today would be.
So you're saying it's important for us to learn the correct information?
Not just the correct, but also a broad understanding of everything. I know it's hard to actually memorize everything that happened, but the idea that, this was a white president that got shot. If we're going to generalize it, that's kind of what it would be. But, something else big might have happened that day too. For all we know, the stock market hit a record high or something. So for economic or fiscal type people, that would be a very important detail to know. If we want to dive a little deeper, for instance, like I was never aware of the Black Wall Street attacks or anything like that, because I learned a little bit different of a history timeline, if you will.
Right. Well, we all can't know everything, so what do you do when it comes to prioritizing what information you learn?
Honestly, it's probably stuff that interests me the most, but the stuff lately has just been what gets us to where we are and what gets us to where I think we should be. If I'm going to be blunt, it'll be something like civil rights. The idea that we talk about all humans being created equal, and we talk about the UN has this thing talking about human rights and how humans are defined or whatever, but somehow that still is forgotten. That because of the color of skin or the way that they choose their partner or the way that they act, that they're not human, and that's kind of unfortunate, especially with everything we've been through and learning about race isn't always most deciding factor of a personality or anything. And it's just very dismal at best to say that, we can do better.
How do you think we do better?
Frankly, back to the main philosophy was treat everybody the way you want to be treated. If you don't want to be judged for the color of your skin, don't judge somebody else for the color of your skin. If you want to marry a person, don't tell somebody else they can't marry a person. It's kind of simple as that. It's crazy how simple the idea is, but in execution, it's kind of faulty in a sense.
Now, did you ever have a personal struggle with this?
With race, or with what kind of aspect are we looking at?
Really just a struggle with identifying, treating, or thinking about other people differently based on arbitrary characteristics or life choices.
Okay, to be blunt, I used to think I was a racist of sorts because I only went to grade school with 2 black kids. They were brothers, and there wasn't a lot hanging out because I wasn't really from the area that the school was in. And then when I got to high school, it was very diverse, and I loved it. And I started realizing that there were some people I didn't like, and I was like, okay, is it because of the color of skin? And I'm like, no, it's just because they're mean to me. And there was people of my same color and not of my same color that I got along with, and there's some that I didn't get along with. So for me, it was kind of like, okay, I don't think I'm a racist. I still have some prejudices that I need to work on, but overall, if you treat me right, I'm going to treat you right. If you're being a really mean person to me, I'm not really going to respect you as much. And it goes both ways in that sense too. Like, if I treat you mean, you're going to keep treating me mean. But overall, generally speaking, yes, I want to treat people the way that I want to be treated.
So what made a big difference for you, it seems, was the fact that you experienced more diversity.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I honestly wish I could have hung out with more of those friends. But again, the high school was even further away from my house than my grade school was, even more diverse, serviced over 50 different zip codes. So unfortunately, I couldn't hang out with all of them as much as I really, really wanted to, because it felt really good being a part of something different than what I was used to. And that was another one of those sense of wonderments, is something that it's different to me, so I want to learn about it.
So personal experience made a difference.
Oh, very much so. I know there's a lot of scientific question about nature versus nurture. They're both very vital. If you don't learn something outside of your circle, outside of your nest, you're in for a rude awakening when you get kicked out. And same goes for nurture. If you're not shown the sympathy, the compassion and stuff, you're not going to understand how to show it to somebody else.
Right. Well, we do have some pretty interesting research on that, on behavior across animal species, not just humans. Like, for example, they did a test with rats that I find really fascinating. Are you familiar with this test?
I'm not.
Okay. So they did a test with rats where they took rats and they put them in a cage and they put little boxes in there, and one had a little rat trapped in it and another had a treat. And the rat would open the box with the other rat in it first if it was familiar with that rat. So they took rats who grew up with other rats like them, rats who are of the same strain. And if the rat was of the same strain that they'd grown up with, then they would let that rat out first, and then they would go for the food. But if it was of a different strain, then they'd go for the food first. But what they found out is it didn't matter what strain it was. It didn't matter if the strain of rat was a different strain or the same strain. It just mattered if that rat was familiar with it. And if they took a rat and put it in a cage with a strain that it wasn't familiar with and it didn't let it out, but then they had it live with a rat of that strain and then it became familiar with it, then when it encountered a rat like that trapped, then it would let it out. So, and I think that reflects in human behavior too, with what you said earlier of the socialization and the exposure of something different makes us empathize with and understand people, which, like also you said at the beginning with the purpose of this podcast, is to familiarize people with people who are different, because we're all different in little ways, and sometimes in big ways. But whether or not we can empathize with or understand each other is contingent on whether or not we're familiar with each other, because it's really it's really easy to dehumanize what you don't know and what you don't understand. But the more you know and understand someone, the harder it is to dehumanize them.
Definitely.
Have you personally had experience with witnessing that in your life? Like, I don't know if that's the best worded question. Well, have you noticed the socialization someone's, other than your personal experience, someone else's socialization changing their perspective and making them more open?
I think so. I think some of my friends in high school, once we left my grade school where there was, not very diverse aspect of our grade school, and went on to high school and learned that there's, a lot more out there. Unfortunately, I went to a private school and a lot of my friends went to a public school, so I think their interactions with the culture type things were a bit different. For instance, the public school by my house, from what I heard, was a tad bit more violent than my high school. So I don't know if they necessarily got the same positive aspects out of it like I would have. Because again, it's a slightly different environment, so if somebody doesn't show that, sympathy and compassion toward you, you're not very likely to hang around that person. So I personally can't say that I have seen much of it. I've seen stuff in my industry where a lot of our guys stick up for each other because we're all family in the sense that we all work together and we have to work with each other. And if somebody else steps over the line, I've had some coworkers stick up for me. I've stuck up for some other coworkers type deal. But I can't really say much about the diversity side, unfortunately.
So what role do you think, because you obviously seem to have a passion for technology, what role do you think technology can play, in your personal opinion, in changing our exposure to other people, to diversity?
Something as simple as this. The idea that everybody has social media, we all have a platform now. Unfortunately, again, it's a double-edged sword where people that hate diversity, if you will, or have very negative views about diversity or somebody else of a different origin than they are, mental capacity, sexual orientation, anything like that, everybody has a platform now. So unfortunately, we've come to the point where everybody has a voice, but everybody thinks everybody else's voices is wrong. And it is unfortunate because we are a society that understands that we need to find a middle ground to progress. Otherwise, we're going to come up two-sided, and nothing's ever two-sided. The only thing that's ever two-sided is something that's quantitative, and that doesn't happen much in nature. There's always going to be more than just what we see. And technology can... The best thing we can do is keep recording, because that's the best way of actually seeing what's said and what's actually done. We can't always, have a video camera on somebody's soul or whatever's going on inside their brain or whatever you want to call it, but at least we can see the actions that they're doing and see how it reflects on their personality. So unfortunately, as good as technology is, we're still never going to have the complete picture of what's actually going on and how to actually, solve everybody's problems.
So you're saying we don't have all the answers?
We don't, and we never will. And I'm trying to remember, there's a book I just recently read that my wife gave me, and the idea is do we really want to know all the answers? Because that's what life is all about, is having some unanswered questions and trying to seek knowledge. If somebody had every single answer, then we're literally just going through motions at that point. It's kind of like this pandemic. My wife and I had a lot of plans this year, and of course, as they say, as soon as you write a plan down, God says, "Ha!" throws it out the window. It's true though. The idea that as soon as you come up with something that you want to do, there's always something that's going to intervene or upset it, where you have to compromise or reschedule or anything like that. And that's kind of what's nice about life, is the spice of life. And I don't want to know all the answers, and if so, it'd just be a very boring place.
So you think it's important that we embrace the questions and the struggle that comes with the questions?
Very much so. Even with science, the idea that they want to explain the universe, how it came about. If you're a Christian, you believe in creationism, whatever, or Big Bang, or any of those things. I honestly don't care, because the idea is it is a mystery. We don't have a definite answer one way or the other. We have carbon dating, which says the universe is so many years old. We have telescopes that see nebulas and stuff randomly appear out of nowhere. Like, we could be as old as the Bible says, or we could be billions of years old, or who knows. Time is just a construct that we came up with, and we follow a linear thing. There's so much more that we don't know, and I'm happy about that.
So it's not important to you that we have the answer?
No. If somebody told me, what is the meaning of life, and they had, a nice one sentence or even a thesis paper on what is the meaning of life, it'd be very unfulfilling, because once you have a definite answer, that explains the question for everybody, if that is truly the answer. So, like, something as crazy as, I think I recently read that one of the laws of physics is being questioned. The idea of black matter, or dark matter, whatever it is. Like, things like that, like scientific theory, again, is, it's considered a fact until something else comes along and proves it wrong. And I think we're on a verge of finding stuff like that right now, and it's incredible, because now we have the sense of wonderment again, saying, what really is it? Instead of being, nope, this is the answer.
So for you, having an absolute answer, it seems like you're saying it makes it a bit of a dead end, where we should keep an open mind and keep pursuing and keep asking questions.
Correct. Just like we keep sending out telescopes in space, even something as old as the Hubble telescope is still taking pictures. We're working on trips to Mars. We're still... The craziest part even about space exploration is we haven't discovered everything on our own planet. The trenching abyss, or deepest rainforests, some uncharted volcanic islands, something like it's exciting to know that we don't have all the answers, and there's still something to be learned. Because I believe if we're going to give an answer to the meaning of life, is learning. But that's the only answer I'd ever want to hear, really.
So for you, it's about the discovery.
It's all about the discovery, because not only are you discovering something about your world, you're probably discovering something about yourself at that point. Like they say, it's not all about the end point, it's all about the journey getting there and all that other great cliche stuff, but it's true. Like, your personality is built on every little moment that you have. It's not built on the goal. Like, my goal is to end up in a grave. That says nothing about my personality. It says everything about how I get there.
So discovery is tied very closely then to your personal sense of wonder.
Yes, very much so.
Now, what if we as the human race had all of the answers? How would that stop you from having still a lifetime of discovery and wonder, considering the fact that nobody can learn everything in their lifetime? I mean, I'm sure as someone who's been in the fields of engineering, there's always more you can know about everything. Like, even if it's fields in which we've thoroughly studied and pretty well understand, no one person has anywhere close to the whole picture.
And that's kind of the exciting part, is no one ever will. Even if we built a supercomputer with the largest servers in the world, nobody's ever going to be able to pilfer through all that information and stuff like that. So there's always going to be some questions, but the biggest one that we look at is, the meaning of life. Why are we here? And without that sense of wonderment of why we're here, I think personally I might, not necessarily lose interest, because, especially with talking about, companionship and socialization, is there's still some other stuff to it. but we're learning in those relationships too, because not everybody's the same, obviously. So even if we had definitive answers to the meaning of life, what's great is at least we'd still have companionship. So if we took away those two things, I believe life would be probably meaningless.
So where do you think meaning comes from?
Meaning comes from the desire of knowledge. The desire of knowledge and fulfilling yourself. Either if it's, literally you internally, or if you're like a caregiver and that's your thing, and caring for somebody else. And I think those all kind of roll into being human, is the idea of caring for yourself and something else other than yourself.
And you can kind of choose what
kind of wired.
Yeah, and it's wired into our brains, like you mentioned, with even something as simple as the mouse. Just learning about another one and starting to, I don't want to necessarily say caring for it, but becoming familiar with it and bonding, or whatever you want to call it. And yeah.
How do you personally identify, or do you have a way to personally identify when you have a personal aversion or a lack of understanding with something? How do you personally identify that, and what do you do with that?
Sometimes it's harder than others to identify, other than somebody pointing it out to you, and then you have to look at the situation and be like, okay, am I doing it or not?
So being open to what other people tell you.
Yeah, criticisms and understanding, like that's one reason that, like, going back to the whole college thing, is the idea of asking other people, because you're your own worst critic. Unless you really have that sense of, like, I don't want to say entitlement, but like the idea of you're very aware of yourself, which I'm not always, and looking at what you're good at. I've done this with coworkers too, and asking, what do you see good in me? And sometimes that's what it takes to get that self-reflection going, is because I'm good at a lot of things, but what am I actually good at? Sorry, I should say, I think I'm good at a lot of things, but what am I actually good at?
So you're saying the difference between what you feel you're good at and the reality of it.
Correct, because you are your own worst critic, but in the same sense, like, some people really know themselves. If you're very broad, if you will, like, unless you have a very, I'm trying to put this delicately or politically correct, if you have a very small skill set, like you have a very specific skill set, you know it and you're aware of it. When you have much broader skill sets where you're not, honed in on a certain little micro subgenre of something, it's hard to actually see what you're truly good at, because you can do a lot fairly well.
Right. Well, you are your own worst critic, but you're also your own most biased critic.
Yes.
So how do you, when you have that self-criticism that arises for just anything, for being human, because that's what we do, is internally criticize ourselves just for being human. When that occurs, what is your personal response to that?
It's kind of an interesting one. I've really thought about the end goal of that, but I try to change for the better. If I criticize myself, or I see I did something wrong, I want to try and fix it the best I can. I mean, been doing what I'm doing for 30 years now, so it's a little bit hard to change some personality traits, even if I want to. But I still try to try to mentally keep notes of it. So if I realize I'm doing it again, I try to mentally stop myself right there from repeating it. And I think that's the big thing, is not admitting that you're doing it, but realizing that you're doing it, and what it is good or bad or whatever it is.
So evaluating your actions and determining if you need to change.
Yeah, that's a much more succinct way of saying it.
So when you're evaluating your actions and determining whether you need to make a change, how do you evaluate when you should change or when you're being unfair?
I guess kind of a moral compass at that point is just thinking, is this good for me, and is this good for whoever I'm doing it to or doing it with, or any sense of the other person, is it good for me and them? If it's bad thing or a not so desirable trait, yes, I'm going to try and curb it. If it's something that's positive, I'm going to try to reinforce that more, or pass it on to somebody else. The best example I can give, again, it's that moral compass, and unfortunately, that's always a gray area with everybody because everybody has their own leanings. The best example I can give is I'm a very not necessarily loud, but kind of outspoken person in person, and I tend to talk over people, and it's something I've been trying to work on personally and trying to cut out and not do so much of. So when somebody else is talking, I try to actually listen to what they're saying. Back to communication 101, the idea of active listening versus just getting set up to answer myself. It's kind of a personal issue that I have, and I'm trying to work on it.
So changing your focus from what you want to say next to hearing what someone else is saying.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, what made you first realize that that's something you needed to work on?
Frankly, it's something that's been brought up to me before, and I've really struggled with it a little bit because sometimes I've realized too, and especially in a family setting, like family dinners and stuff, if you don't jump in and interject, your thought is going to get lost. They're going to move 3 subjects on, and by the time you want to say your little anecdote, it's already too late. In the same sense, sometimes that's just how it is.
So that environment conditioned you a little bit to just jump in?
A little bit. Same with school. Like the whole raising your hand thing was nice, but like sometimes it became a competition. Like first person to answer this. We see it with radio shows too. Like third person to call in and stuff like that. It's kind of. I don't want to give myself an excuse, but it's kind of brought up in society, the idea first one to do this, or whatever number to do this, and you start that mentality of like, okay, I got to jump in there, I got to take this opportunity or anything like that, and it sometimes goes as far as speech.
You had said something earlier about which is related to this, and it seems like you brought it up again, of listening to other people. So when other people correct you, how does that make you feel?
Depending on the scenario, sometimes, yeah. Depending on the scenario, like if it's something that I know I do day in and day out, like something I do professionally, and somebody says, "Oh, you did that wrong," I'll admit I do get a little defensive, and then I kind of think about what made them want to say that, or why are they saying that? Is something unsafe, or did they do it wrong, whatever. So I'll sometimes double check something as simple as me doing my work, but other times, yeah, I try to take stuff to heart as best I can to better myself. If it's something out of the ordinary and kind of ridiculous, sometimes I'll just kind of accept it and not really do anything about it.
So what's a way that someone else can communicate to you that makes it easier for you to hear criticism?
Since I've grown up with a lot of sense of math and science, like if somebody actually, like I said, the best example I can give is like rigging a projector and running power to it. I've been doing it for a long time. I've worked with some of the people that actually design some of the stuff that works with these transformers and with projectors. So when somebody tells me that something's wrong, I'd like to ask them, hey, how do you do it, and why? Sometimes it comes down to even something as far as actually looking up a schematic, something like that. So, for instance, we had some projector issues, and they said, "Hey, why is this working?" It's like, "Oh, it's because it's not enough power." Well, what kind of power do we need? Something as simple as that.
Is there any reason why we can't know something and through our understanding of it retain a sense of wonder and appreciation for it, for what it is, now that we understand it?
That's a good point. And no, you can always have a sense of wonderment. And the biggest example I can give is with cinema, movies, and theater. The idea that, okay, I know how something is being done. Magic tricks is another one. I know how it's being done. I know it's not necessarily something magic, unless it's CGI and it's digital, but there's a physical explanation for something that happens. And that's kind of the cool part is you know it's happening, but you still let your brain go in the sense like, oh my goodness, this is an amazing way to show this. Like I said, the best one I can give is the idea of a hologram. We've seen them in movies. They're usually digitally done at that point, but I've seen in my profession real holograms, and the sense of wonderment is still there because there's different ways to do it. Same with 3D. Like, you know what it is, but on the same aspect, you take your not consciousness of it, but your judgment of it, I guess. I mean, if it's done well, you still look at it and go, oh my goodness, this is amazing.
In closing, what are some thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Just be, good to people, because you don't know where they're coming from, even if they're, the same skin color as you or not. There could be other financial factors, emotional factors, mental health, other internal struggles, and we all need to help support each other in whatever way we can. And even if somebody says, hey, I don't want help, don't help them, but always be there to support them. The best we can do for somebody is to listen, and if they ask for anything else, do the best you can.
Fair enough. What a world it'd be if we could all pull that off.
Yeah, it's sad that the idea that equal rights aren't equal. And I mean, I know there's a lot of work that we have to do. We talk about institutionalisms and societal or systematic problems that we have to, identify, acknowledge, work on. We do have a long way to go, but I think we're starting to realize some stuff. And hopefully we keep, as we talked about earlier, we're a history of writing things down and learning. If we can keep passing down what we've learned, maybe we can keep really gnawing at these problems that we have and overcome them.
Maybe. I would like to think so. Seems like we've been headed in that direction for a lot of history. It's a crawl. It's a slow crawl. It's like an iceberg. It moves so slow, but one day at a time. Thank you for joining me. This has been The Struggle for Meaning with Russell Eugene Welch III as your host. That's me. If you have enjoyed this program, please share it with someone else and leave a 5-star review to help us grow. If you go to lingeringshadow.com, you can find my blog, social media, updates on all my current projects, and announcements for future ones. I post all kinds of stuff on there every day. We always have an ongoing conversation about personal growth and finding meaning there. So hop on over and let's hear your thoughts too. Again, that's lingeringshadow.com. Keep learning, keep growing, and take it all one day at a time. You got this. Remember, you are not alone. We all live life together, so let's share life together. Now, here's a moment for yourself to just breathe and feel alive. Take care.